Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok v'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So we're on to Parshat Toldot at this point. And excuse me, we've already read about the passages involving Jacob selling Esau the pottage for his, his lentil soup. He sold his lentil soup to Esau for the sake of his birthright. We already had that. We also discussed what the nature of that birthright was. And it actually had to do with the priesthood. And we had a beautiful and profound Rashi interpretation as to what Esau meant when he said, "What good is the priest? What good is this birthright to me?" etc. So I'd refer you back to those previous sessions that we had. And now we're in the midst of a section that deals with Isaac himself and his living in the land of the Philistines. And so we'll get started on this. And I will tell you that this is one of the more puzzling sections of the Torah in terms of its trying to understand it beyond its simple narrative meaning. And we'll see if somehow we can understand that. There's another passage later on, which we will get to, involving Jacob and Laban, and Laban trying to cheat Jacob out of his salary, and what Jacob does to get the salary. And knowing as little about animal husbandry as I do, what he does seems very strange in terms of the pshat of the text. So I will just leave that hanging there. But this is another one of these passages which I feel are begging some deeper interpretation. So so the last verse we read before last year was how Jacob sowed in that land and found in that year 100 times, and that God blessed him. So this is again knowing that this word barach, right, berech, is being used in connection with plenitude. I think it's important to remember that the idea of blessing has to do with plenitude. So Vayigdal ha'ish, the man grew, referring to Isaac. Vayelech haloch v'gadol, and he continued to become greater and greater. Ad ki gadal ma'od, until he was indeed very, very great, very prosperous, etc., exceedingly prosperous. And last year I mentioned that success guarantees you one thing for sure, and that is there will be those who are jealous of you. It unfortunately seems to breed enmity. So we'll take a look at the Rashi, Ki Gadol Ma'od. So how might we understand how wealthy, how great Isaac is? And we are talking about his property here, basically. And this is something that may be memorable. You'll see it's Shahayu Omrim. People would say in describing Isaac's greatness, Zevel Dotav, the dung of his mules, Shel Yitzchak, of Isaac, the dung of the mules of Isaac, to express how much there was. Velo kaspo v'zahavo shel alivi melech. And they wouldn't, in other words, in order to express a huge amounts, that's what they would refer to, and not the silver and gold of Avimelech. And to me, there's a sort of little element of humor involved in all of that. In other words, something, of course, that we question whether the dung has any comparison to gold and silver, but that's what they were talking about. That the dung of Isaac's mules were so much larger, etc., so much greater. So, of course, referring to the number of mules, etc. And again, what does this leaves for me some unanswered questions as to, again, what is the significance of saying this? And I suspect that, allowing one's mind to wander over this and think, what is its literary significance?
I
Yes,
have,
Lisa, yes,
yes. So a large amount of dung can make for very fertile soil.
yes, for sure. I agree. I agree. It's certainly, yeah, yeah. I was also wondering whether they were talking about the value of it, because dung doesn't have the same value of silver and gold, and yet, of course, it does have value. And I suppose there was so much of it, it outclassed the value of Avimelech's silver and gold. But
But
agreed, yes.
could it also be that the value of things are different at different times? And, for most of us who cultivate our soil and do
Hmm.
not have that, we pay for it.
Yes,
And maybe
exactly.
back then, this kind of thing was very valuable also.
Yes,
And the
agreed.
dung has intrinsic value, whereas the silver and gold are valuable because we say so, in a sense.
In a
Oh yeah,
sense, they're also, I mean, the malleability of gold, the fact that it doesn't, rust or anything like that is very handy too. So, yeah,
But its
yeah,
value is not so much the malleability, it's the currency of it, which
correct,
is something that
correct.
we chose.
Yes,
yes.
I agree. I agree. But it could also be its rarity, etc. We could spend some time on it, but I think you'll agree. We can definitely, I think the point is well made.
I think a little bit of both is good.
Yes, of course. Of course. Agreed. Agreed. So, yeah, I think the fact that one has coinage and intrinsic value makes it useful as a medium of exchange. That is its great value too, right? Okay. Vayhi miknetzon. So now the Torah is going to be a little bit more specific about the nature of Isaac's prosperity. And he had miknetzon, right? He has acquisitions of sheep, umikne, but the word mikne often means cattle. It does refer generally to cattle, but here it's being associated here with tson. So you could say flocks, it's one translation out there, but it's also clearly related to the root kana, and kana means to acquire. And that's why I translated it as acquisitions of sheep, umikne vakar, excuse me, and acquisitions of cattle, avuda rabbah. And the word avodah refers to servants from Eved, right? But it's an unusual vocalization of this particular root. But I would, and according to the Targum, it is many servants. I saw another translation, I think it was in Sepharia, that referred to it as a large household, which could incorporate this particular notion. So let's go on. Vayikanu oto plishtim, and here we go. And the Philistines were jealous of him. That's a problem. It is a problem. For Avudah Rabbah. So Rashi again hones in on this somewhat unusual vocalization of instead of avadim, which would be servants, right? Great Avudah. So what do we say? Yeah, well, I translate it as servants, but it means, again, household, perhaps. Pe'ula Rabbah. So this is the way Rashi understands it, and the reason why the Torah is picking this particular form of the word. And Pe'ula is a work. Business, possibly? That would be interesting. Much business? Could be, would make sense. But a Pe'ula means an act, some kind of act that you do. So, in other words, he had a lot of activity going on that was of sort of business activity in trying to play around with this word. Belashon las, and in French, okay, it looks like, and Lauren, you may have a better translation of this, or form of it. So it looks like ouvre, right? Ouvre in French does mean work, right? Ouvrain, something like that. Arbeit in German definitely means work. Geschäft means business. And this is a word I'm not familiar with. And I don't have a Yiddish dictionary on me at this moment. But it says, looks like verb, something like that. So, avodah or avuda, mashma avodah achat. So, I think this would have to be pointed as avodah, right? As work. Mashma implies one work, one activity. Avuda, mashma pu'ula rabba. But the word avuda implies a great deal of activity, a great deal of business. So, onwards. So what starts happening, right? We're now going to clearly get problems. You know, it's so interesting, right? This, of course, it doesn't appear as if Abraham has these kinds of issues, but Isaac has, you know, this sort of jealousy. We don't read, I don't believe, that anyone's jealous of Abraham, but we do have jealousy with regards to Isaac. That's interesting where this is introduced. And of course, the issue has to do with how we understand anti-Semitism. And does anti-Semitism have something to do with some sort of level of implied jealousy? Okay, onwards. V'chol ha'be'erot asher chafru avdei aviv, and all the wells which the servants of his father had dug. Bimei Avraham, during the days of Avraham Avinu, during the days of Abraham his father, Sitmum Plishtim. Okay, the Philistines blocked Uvimalum Afar, and they filled them with earth. Now we understand, again, this is sort of this area where I'm saying the Torah is leaving us to try and derive some sort of literary understanding, because we know how water is so symbolic. Water is such a necessity. It's such a primary kind of thing. And wells, of course, are a supply of water, and they allow one to exist. And here are the Philistines blocking them, which are clearly going to have an effect on how the cattle and the sheep are watered. They require constant nourishment in that regard, and how basic it is. Incidentally, something I learned from watching a series by Abba Eban about civilization, the nature of civilization, which is related to a word that refers to towns and cities. And the whole issue of cities and the ability of human beings to create cities had to do with the creation of a reliable source of water. And that ability of human beings to create reliable sources of water made it possible for them to move away from a nomadic existence. And of course, being able to settle in one place allowed for an interchange of ideas, sort of like later on during the time of the Renaissance, the coffee houses, and the intellectual activity that went about, because you didn't have to go and get water all the time. You had a reliable source. So understanding a little bit on a deeper level what was going on and the nature of this activity on the part of the Philistines to try and lessen Isaac's success, and to, in fact, hit him right where it was going to hurt, because we just read about all the acquisitions and all the, excuse me, and all the cattle and the sheep, that this would be a very effective way of trying to destroy it. And is it talking about some kind of give and take with regards to, civilized behavior? I'm not sure. I'd have to try and think this through further. But it's definitely seems to me that it has some greater level of meaning that it's escaping me right now.
Well, another way to look at it, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I learned it from you, was that water can symbolize Torah,
Yes.
and that that's the same thing as something that's necessary for life, or
Right.
for eternal life. And this was an attempt to block that,
Interesting.
or
Yeah.
something in
Right. No, no
contradiction to
question.
that.
Yes. Thanks, Lauren. Yes. In fact, you could say that Torah is spiritual water, that just as water is absolutely necessary to sustain, human physical life, Torah is the spiritual water that we have to sustain the life of our souls. So you could make that. Yes, and we could try and apply that here and see what's going on here. Let's go on with the next verse. We are looking at verse 15 in the Rashi. Let's see. Yeah, Sitmum Plishtim. The Philistines blocked them, right? Excuse me. Mipnei she'amru, and listen to this. This is so interesting. This Rashi, they had an argument. They tried to, it seems to me, at least on the surface, to come up with an excuse for the bad behavior, right? For this negative behavior, and that is so human. Here's the thing. They said, Meshem Shamru, Takala Heimlana. They are a stumbling block, something like that. They're a problem for us. Specifically, you'll see mipnei hagayasot, on account of the troops habaot aleinu, which are coming on us. In other words, they're saying the fact that the troops that want to attack us now have these wells that they can work from, that will supply them their water needs. They have an easier time. So, in other words, sort of a scorched earth policy, and that again, what is the inner meaning of this rabbinic understanding of why the Philistines blocked these wells, right? And Amru, of course, could possibly mean they thought, which would make them a little bit less malicious, but regardless, looking for excuses, right? So again, this is deep stuff. Tmunun, right? Plishtae. This is the Aramaic translation of it, of sitmum. So tmunun means to hide away. In other words, I would think that the meaning of this Aramaic is that the Philistines made them not capable. You couldn't see them anymore. So whether or not that means they were just not necessarily stopped up, and that's why the Torah goes on to say, and they filled them with earth. At any rate, that's tmunu, in this case, spelled like this, it can also refer to insulation, to insulate something. So to insulate, of course, means to block it off. So they blocked it. Lashon stima, this has the connotation of a blockage. Uvelashon haTalmud, and in the language of the Talmud, we have an expression mitamtem et halev. It obstructs or it dulls the heart. In other words, so example, too much alcohol, right? Consumption can dull the ability of a person to think. And they use this word mitamtem, which is it's a pilpel form of the word taman. So again, trying to get to a better understanding of what is going on here. Next verse. Vayomer Avimelech el Yitzchak. Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, said to Yitzchak, and by the way, the word Avimelech means my father is king. It is probably a title or an honorific of some kind. That's what Philistine kings were called. And of course, that would imply legitimacy of that particular reign. So he says to him, Lech me'imanu, go away from us. Ki atzamta mimenu me'od, because you have become too powerful for us. Now look at the parallel just briefly at what happened to the Israelites in Egypt. In other words, this story is in some ways a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to the Israelites in Egypt when it talks again about how numerous they became. And of course, Pharaoh operates in just the opposite kind of way. Avimelech is at least saying, please leave, go somewhere else. Pharaoh, on the other hand, of course, enslaves them. But there's at least somewhat of a similar theme of the people of Israel ultimately becoming very powerful and numerous. So it's a major theme for us, and then the subsequent consequences of that. Let's get in here. Let's see. Okay, no Rashi on this. Sorry. Vayelech misham, and so Isaac is, he doesn't push his way. He says, Vayelech misham Yitzchak. Isaac went from there. Vayichan benachal Gerar, and he encamped in the wadi of Gerar. Vayeshev sham, and he settled there. So he's listening to Avimelech as to what is going on. Let's take a look. Benachal Gerar, he says, Rachok min ha'ir. In other words, going a distance from the city. So he'd initially tried to settle in the city. That wasn't going to work. And so he has to go to the Wadi Gerar to find a place there to settle. And so he's trying to, in a peaceful way, to solve this problem. I'm thinking I may stop here for now, and let's see what I can do. And invite any other comments that you'd like to make on this. Let me just make this, oops. Let's see what we're talking about. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. There we are. Okay. So any comments before I stop the share? It's interesting area here. I wanted to say one thing. This verse 15 here, which says all the wells which the servants of his father Abraham, right, we're told, had dug, the Philistines had blocked. So could that also mean that earlier on they had done this? In other words, that there was some indication that we're hearing here of the Philistines trying to undo what Abraham had accomplished. And Lauren, following the idea of what you're saying, right, that if this has to do with Torah, if we're to understand it metaphorically as Torah, that blocking these wells is trying to undermine and prevent the spread and the blessing of Torah. So, any other comments before I do stop the share? Very good. I will stop the recording too.